USS Laffey, or DD-724, was an Allen M. Sumner-class destroyer. I say was, I should say is, but more on that later. And she was constructed during World War II, laid down and launched in 1943. She is not to be confused with USS Laffey DD-459, who also served during World War II, though she was lost in action at Guadalcanal on November 13, 1942, in an impressive last stand. DD-724 Laffey, sometimes called Laffey 2, depends who you ask, displaced 2,200 long tons, had a length of 376 feet 6 inches, a beam of 40 feet, a draft of 14 feet 8 inches, and was powered by 2 steam turbines that drove 2 shafts, propelling her to a top speed of 34 knots, 39 miles per hour. She had a complement of 336 men and was armed with 6 5-inch dual-purpose guns, 12 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 11 20mm anti-aircraft guns, as well as 10 24-inch torpedo tubes. She also had 6 depth-charge projectors and 2 depth-charge tracks. Her keel was laid down on June 28, 1943 by Bath Iron Works Corporation in Bath, Maine. She'd be launched November 21st that same year, and sponsored by Miss Beatrice F. Laffey, who was the daughter of Bartlett Laffey, who was awarded the Medal of Honor for his own stand against Confederate forces on May 5, 1864. USS Laffey would be commissioned into the fleet on February 8, 1944, with Commander Frederick Beckton in command. Once training was complete, Laffey would visit the Washington Naval Yard for 1 day before leaving on February 28, 1944, and arrive in Bermuda on March 4th. She'd return briefly to Naval Station Norfolk, where she actually served as a school ship, and then headed to New York City to join the screen of a convoy escort that was bound for England on May 14th. She'd refuel at Greenock, Scotland, and then continued on to Plymouth, England, arriving on May 27th. From there, she'd immediately prepare for the invasion of France, D-Day, and on June 3rd, she headed off for the Normandy beaches, escorting tugs, landing craft, as well as 2 Dutch gunboats. They arrived off Utah Beach at dawn on D-Day, June 6, 1944. And over the next couple days, Laffey screened to seaward, and on the 8th and 9th of June, she would successfully bombard gun emplacements. But after that, she had to leave temporarily to head back to Plymouth to replenish her ammunition, and then return the following day. On June 12th, she pursued some enemy E-boats that had torpedoed the destroyer Nelson, and Laffey was able to break up their formation and prevent further attacks. With her screening duties done, she would return to England and arrive at Portsmouth on June 22nd, where it was actually tied off alongside Battleship Nevada. On June 25th, she and Nevada would head off to join Bombardment Group 2 and assist in shelling the defenses at Cherbourg-Octeville. They were immediately taken under fire by shore batteries, and destroyers Barton and O'Brien were a hit. Laffey herself was hit above the waterline by a ricochet, but it failed to explode and did little damage to her. Later on that same day, the bombardment group would retire and head back to Northern Ireland, arriving at Belfast on July 1st, 1944. She sailed along with Destroyer Division 119, or DESDIV 119, 3 days later for home, arriving in Boston, Massachusetts on July 9th. There she'd undergo an overhaul that would last a month, after which she got underway to test newly installed electronic equipment. 2 weeks later, she set course for Norfolk and arrived there on August 25th. Just the following day, however, she'd be redispatched to the Pacific. She departed for Hawaii via the Panama Canal and arrived at Pearl Harbor in September. On October 23rd, after further training, she headed for the front line in the Pacific, mooring at Ulithi on November 5th. That same day, she would join the screen of Task Force 38, which was then conducting airstrikes against enemy shipping, aircraft, and airfields in the Philippines. On November 11th, she would actually spot a parachute. She left the screen and managed to rescue a badly wounded Japanese pilot, who would then be transferred to the aircraft carrier Enterprise during refueling operations and held as a prisoner of war. Laffey would return to Ulithi on November 22nd, and on the 27th, she set course for Leyte Gulf with ships of Destroyer Squadron 60, or Desron 60. She operated with the 7th Fleet, screening the big ships against submarine and air attacks. She covered landings at Ormoc Bay on December 7th. While doing that, she silenced a shore battery and shelled enemy troop concentrations. After some brief upkeep work at San Pedro Bay on December 8th, Laffey headed off with the ships of Close Support Group 77.3 on December 12th for Mindoro, where she would again support landings on December 15th. Once the beachhead had been established, Laffey went off to escort empty landing craft back to Leyte, arriving at San Pedro Bay on December 17th. 10 days after that, she patrolled with Task Group 77.3 off Mindoro. And after she returned briefly to San Pedro Bay, she joined the 7th Fleet, spending the month of January 1945 screening amphibious ships that were landing troops in the Lingayen Gulf area of Luzon. She'd be back in Ulithi by January 27th, and in February she supported Task Force 58, that was conducting diversionary airstrikes on Tokyo, as well as direct air support of Marines fighting on Iwo Jima. Late in February, Laffey carried vital intelligence information to Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz at Guam, arriving there on March 1st. The following day, she was back in Ulithi again for intensive training with the battleships of Task Force 54. On March 21st, she sortied with the task force for the invasion of Okinawa. Laffey helped capture Kuramaredo, while bombarding shore establishments and harassing the enemy with fire at night, as well as screening for much heavier ships. But Laffey's claim to fame would happen during Okinawa. On April 15th, 1945, she was assigned to Radar Picket Station 1, that was about 30 miles north of Okinawa, and she'd join in repulsing an air attack. During that, at least 13 enemy aircraft were downed. But the following day, April 16th, 1945, the Japanese would launch another air attack, with roughly 50 planes. Laffey would suddenly find herself swarmed by multiple kamikaze aircraft, who decided that she was a pretty important target. At 8:30, an Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber appeared near Laffey for reconnaissance purposes. When it was fired upon, it jettisoned its bomb and left. But soon after that, 4 D-3As broke formation and made a dive into Laffey. 2 of them came in from the starboard bow. One was shot down by the mid-range 40mm guns, and the other was downed by the 20mm guns. But the other 2 D-3As had attacked from the stern. One shed pieces under fire until its fixed landing gear caught the water. The 4th got very close, but it was shot down. Immediately afterward, one of Laffey's gunners then destroyed a Yokosuka D-4Y that was making a strafing approach on the port beam. 10 seconds later, Laffey's main gun battery hit a second D-4Y on a bombing approach from the starboard beam. The D-4Y's bomb would detonate in the water and wound starboard gunners with shrapnel. At 8:42, Laffey managed to destroy yet another D-3A approaching from the port side. And while the bomber didn't actually hit her, it did make a glancing blow against her deck before crashing into the sea, spewing aviation fuel as it went. 3 minutes later, another D-3A approached from the port side, managing to crash into one of the 40mm mounts, killing 3 men, destroying several guns, as well as setting the magazine on fire. After that, another D-3A made a strafing approach from the stern, managing to hit the aft 5-inch gun mount, and disintegrated as its bomb detonated the powder magazine. That destroyed the gun turret, and caused a major fire. Another D-3A, making a similar approach astern, also impacted the burning gun mount, after its left wing was caught on fire by Laffey's gunners. While that was happening, a completely different D-3A made a conventional bomb run, approaching from astern, dropped its bomb, which, when detonated, jammed Laffey's rudder at 26 degrees to port, and killed several men. Still another D-3A and a D-4Y approached from port, and also hit Laffey. All this damage would risk sinking even a much larger ship, but Laffey stubbornly clung to life, And while all this was happening, 4 FM-2 Wildcats had taken off from the escort carrier Shamrock Bay, and they were trying to help Laffey by intercepting the kamikaze planes. One of the Wildcat pilots, Carl Ryman, made a dive into the kamikaze formation and targeted a D-3A. His wingman took out that one, while Ryman lined up behind another, managing to destroy that aircraft. 10 seconds later, Ryman pursued a Nakajima B-5N torpedo plane, taking that out as well. 5 seconds after that, Ryman lined up another B-5N and expended the last of his ammunition. As he returned to his carrier, he would make dive passes at kamikazes, forcing some of them to break off their attacks, thinking he still had ammunition. He didn't, but they didn't know that. The other 3 Wildcats destroyed a few aircraft and then interfered with the enemy's attack runs after they also ran out of ammo, only returning to Shamrock Bay when their fuel ran too low. Later on, a group of 12 Vought F-4U Corsair fighters from the United States Marine Corps also intercepted some of the kamikazes. Their actions took a lot of the pressure off of Laffey, but she was still in danger, even with fighter support. Another D-3A would approach the disabled Laffey from the port. A Corsair pursued the kamikaze and did destroy it, after forcing it to overshoot the ship. Then that same Corsair lined up behind a Ki-43 Oscar that was making a strafing approach on Laffey from starboard. One of Laffey's gunners managed to hit the Oscar, bringing it down, though it did hit Laffey's mast as it fell. But the pursuing Corsair also crashed into the ship's radar antenna and fell into the water. Fortunately, that pilot would be later rescued. Another D-3A then came in from the stern and dropped a bomb that detonated off the port side. That one would be later destroyed by a Corsair. The Corsair then quickly lined up behind another D-3A and fired, but couldn't stop it from dropping its bomb, which hit and destroyed one of Laffey's 40mm gun mounts, killing all gunners that were there. The Corsair then lined up behind 2 Oscars, approaching from the bow, taking one out, though was shot down by the other. The surviving Oscar was then brought down by Laffey's gunners. Laffey's main battery fired upon a D-3A approaching from the starboard, hitting the plane directly on the nose, and the final attacker, a D-4Y, was shot down by a Corsair. And by the end of this insanity, this absolute madness that plagued poor Laffey, she survived, despite being hit by 4 bombs, 6 kamikazes, and strafing fire that had killed 32 and wounded 71. The assistant communications officer on board her, Lieutenant Frank Manson, did ask Captain Becton if he thought they should abandon ship, to which Becton snapped back, "No! I'll never abandon ship as long as a single gun will fire!" Which is so metal of him, but he didn't hear, allegedly, was that a nearby lookout said softly after this remark, "And if I can find one man to fire it." The point was, Laffey had taken a beating, but she stayed afloat. The Japanese had expended significant resources, sacrificing multiple planes via kamikaze strikes in an attempt to sink a single destroyer, and failed! And after that, Laffey was taken under tow and anchored off Okinawa on April 17, 1945. Temporary repairs were immediately put in place to keep her afloat, and then she sailed for Saipan, arriving on April 27th. 4 days after that, she got underway for the West Coast, arriving at Tacoma, Washington on May 24th, and then entering dry dock at Todd Shipyard for full repairs, which lasted until September 6th. She then headed off to San Diego and arrived there on September 9th. 2 days after that, on September 11th, Laffey got underway for exercises, but, collided with the submarine chaser, PC-815, in a thick fog. Laffey was alright, though PC-815 was not. Though Laffey was able to rescue all but a single member of 815's crew, before she headed back to San Diego for repairs again. If it wasn't obvious, by the time Laffey was really ready to roll again, World War II was over. But she wasn't done yet. While many of the old-school dreadnought battleships saw the end of their lives coming, destroyers, especially the newer ones, were still considered very helpful, and the Navy wanted to keep them around. So on October 5th, Laffey would sail for Pearl Harbor, arriving there on October 11th, and then she operated in Hawaiian waters until May 21st, 1946, when she was to participate in Operation Crossroads, the atomic bomb tests at Bikini Atoll. And you're probably confused. I just got done saying that she wasn't going anywhere. She's being nuked now, and no, not in the same way as the battleships I've mentioned before. See, Laffey was not a part of these tests to be a target. Laffey was there to collect scientific data from the tests. So she was not directly hit by a nuclear bomb, though she was slightly irradiated and had to be decontaminated by sandblasting her underwater surfaces to within an inch of their existence, as well as acid washing and partial replacement of saltwater piping and evaporators. But she wasn't sunk by a nuke, nor was she to be disposed of. She would sail for the West Coast via Pearl Harbor, arriving in San Diego on August 22nd for operations over there. In February of 1947, she would make a cruise to Guam and Kwajalein, and then return to Pearl Harbor on March 11th. She operated in Hawaiian waters until heading to Australia on May 1st. She then returned to San Diego on June 17th, and was finally decommissioned on June 30th, 1947, entering the Pacific Reserve Fleet. But Laffey was not destined to stay there. Unlike pretty much every ship I've talked about so far, she didn't languish in reserve until being scrapped. Oh no, Laffey was recommissioned on January 26, 1951, with Commander Charles Holovac in command, to take part in the Korean War. After a shakedown off of San Diego, she headed to the east coast of the United States, arriving at Norfolk in February for an overhaul, followed by refresher training at Guantanamo Bay. In mid-January 1952, she sailed for Korea, arriving there in March, and operated with Task Force 77, screening the carriers Antietam and Valley Forge. In May, with Captain Henry J. Conger in command, Laffey took part in the blockade of Wonsan in Korea. During this time, she was subjected to significant hostile fire, and her captain ordered multiple counter-battery duels with the enemy. And let's be real about this. She took on how many kamikazes and bombs? You think your shore batteries are gonna sink this ship? Are you serious? 'Cause they didn't. After a brief refit at Yokosuka on May 30th, she would return to Korea to rejoin the task force. On June 22nd, she sailed again for the East Coast, transiting the Suez Canal, arriving back in Norfolk on August 19th. She then operated in the Caribbean with a hunter-killer group until February of 1954, departing on a world cruise, which included a tour off Korea until June 29th. She departed the Far East, bound for the East Coast of America via the Suez Canal again, arriving back in Norfolk again. She likes going there, on August 25th. She operated out of Norfolk and participated in fleet exercises and plane guard duties, and actually rescued 4 passengers on October 7th from Able, a schooner that had sunk in a storm off the Virginia Capes. During the first part of 1955, she participated in extensive anti-submarine exercises. She would visit Halifax, Nova Scotia, New York City, Miami, as well as multiple ports in the Caribbean. In 1958, she operated with ASW carriers in Floridian and Caribbean waters. With the Korean War wrapped up, Laffey settled into her roles during the Cold War. On November 7th, 1956, she departed Norfolk and headed for the Mediterranean at the height of the Suez Crisis. She would join the Sixth Fleet, which was patrolling the Israeli-Egyptian border at the time. Once the tensions between these nations eased up, Laffey returned back to Norfolk on February 20th, 1957, and resumed her operations along the Atlantic coast. She would depart on September 3rd for NATO operations off Scotland, and then she headed for the Mediterranean and rejoined the Sixth Fleet. Laffey returned to Norfolk on December 22nd. In June 1958, she made a cruise to the Caribbean for a major exercise. Returning to Norfolk the next month, Laffey resumed regular operations till August 7th of 1959, when she deployed with Desron 32 for the Mediterranean. She transited the Suez Canal on December 14th, stopping off in multiple locations, including Saudi Arabia, where she spent Christmas. She operated in the Persian Gulf until late January 1960, when she again transited the Suez Canal, and then went back home, arriving at Norfolk on February 28th. In mid-August, she participated in a large naval NATO exercise. In October, she would visit Antwerp, Belgium, though she was back in the Mediterranean by January of 1961. While she was there, she actually assisted the British passenger and cargo ship Dara, which had actually suffered an explosion and was on fire. Laffey would send parties aboard to help extinguish the fires, and she was back in Norfolk by August 28th. She then set out again in September for a rigorous training program that was designed to blend the crew into an effective fighting team, and she continued that training until February of 1963, when she assumed the duties of service ship for the Norfolk Test and Evaluation Detachment. From October 1963 to June of 1964, she operated with a hunter-killer group along the eastern seaboard, and on June 12th made a midshipman cruise to the Mediterranean. On June 25th, the task group departed for a surveillance mission observing Soviet naval forces that were also training in the Mediterranean. Laffey visited multiple ports down there during this mission, and she was back in Norfolk by September 3rd. She continued to make regular Mediterranean cruises with the 6th Fleet, and participate in numerous operational and training exercises over the years, but nothing lasts forever. Laffey was a great ship, but she was getting old, and she was finally decommissioned and stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on March 9th, 1975. She would be the last Sumner-class destroyer to be decommissioned. For her service over the years, Laffey received the Presidential Unit Citation and 5 Battle Stars for World War II, the Korean Presidential Unit Citation and 2 Battle Stars for the Korean War, the Meritorious Unit Commendation during the Cold War, as well as the Battle E during all 3 conflicts. But Laffey's final destination proved not to be the scrapyard. Fortunately for her, it was decided that she could serve as a museum ship. Destroyers are easier to take care of than large battleships or aircraft carriers, since they're just smaller, they're cheaper to maintain, and they take up less space. And Laffey certainly had a rich history, and people wanted to save her, and she currently sits at Patriots Point in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. The Laffey's battle was not over, and her retirement not without incident. See, in October of 2008, it was discovered that she had sprung over, let me check my notes here, 100 leaks, which, no. The officials at Patriots Point were terrified that she could sink at her mooring, and it would take an estimated $9 million to tow her to dry dock for repairs. But fortunately, the Patriots Point officials were able to secure a $9.2 million loan from the state of South Carolina to do this particular task. On August 19, 2009, Laffey was towed to Detyen's shipyards in North Charleston on the Cooper River to be put into dry dock. Her hull was repaired with thicker plating, welding, as well as a fresh coat of paint. On April 16, 2010, the Board of Trustees of Clemson University reached a lease agreement for Patriots Point organization to moor Laffey adjacent to their property at the former naval base Charleston in North Charleston. Laffey would be returned to Patriots Point on January 25, 2012, with more than a dozen former crew members among the crowd to greet her. It cost a further $1.1 million to move her back to the museum, as well as make repairs to accommodate her in a new berth. But she's back, and safe once again, likely to remain so for many years to come, so she could share her incredible story with future generations. And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Brian, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Lord Off 444, Murder Jornstall, A Person 723, Ro Hudson 2860, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Red Lion, NS Productions 8104, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Ohio Trucker 1, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Hayden DeGrow, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, The Oklahoma Hot Rail, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, Travis Zelinsky, Jared Brussell, Joshua Long, Hannah Bird, Amtrak 2024 Productions, Tommy Rossini, That Guy with a Beard, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, Dr. Razor 78, and G Wiz. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.